from Cornell, talking about fishing for faults that cause the biggest earthquakes. And this March 19th event is not a Science in the Pub event, but a panel of teachers who are teaching climate electives and talking about that. And that's online. On the 22nd of March, we will have a in-person workshop at the Cayuga Nature Center. And March 27th, we'll have Chloe Arson talking about renewable energy, I think will be the theme of her talk. And then April 10th, we'll have Dining in the Garden of Eden, Earth's First Herbivores and the Evolution of the Modern Terrestrial Ecosystem with Dr. Richard Kissel. And our Earth Day event will be Ben Luce, the chair of the American Solar Energy Society, talking about solar energy. Big surprise. And we will wrap up the season with Dr. Sarah Worley from Daemen University talking about charismatic microflora, introducing the hidden freshwater algae all around us. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it off to Rob to introduce Jason. And again, welcome one and all. Thank you for joining us tonight. Rob, take it away.
All right. It is a great pleasure to have Jason Wiles here this evening with us, a longtime collaborator. So as I think you heard from the slides, Jason is an associate professor of biology at Syracuse University, but he's also affiliated with the departments of Earth and Environmental Sciences and also science teaching. So he has received many awards for his research and involvement in science education, in particular around doing research on evolution education and defending its teaching. So a sampling of those awards includes a 2021 Friend of Darwin Award from the National Center for Science Education, a 2020 Thomas Henry Huxley Award from the Society for the Study of Evolution, a College Educator of the Year Award from the Technology Alliance of Central New York. He is a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science for his distinguished contributions to science education. He has received 2 awards, the Research in Biology Education Award and the Evolution Education Award from the National Association of Biology Teachers. And among the many interesting things that he does and is involved in, he is the scientific advisor to religious leaders of the Clergy Letter Project and the principal author of the Humanist Clergy Letter. Jason, it is a delight to have you here. I'll hand it to you.
Well, thank you so much, Robert. I didn't know you knew all that about me.
I've been keeping track.
Well, that's good. This is one of those things where I'm not sure if that made me feel better or if it made me feel like, oh my gosh, these folks are expecting a lot of high-level stuff here. But I hope not, because I was told that this is a pub engagement and that at least Don has cracked his beer. There we go. I'm going with the Saratoga water here until after I'm done. And then, I kind of like the idea of an informal discussion for at least for the beginning here. I see a lot of names on here of people that I know and people that that I've been impressed by. That can be a little bit intimidating, and I like to take the edge off with the idea that it's an informal gathering and maybe a lot of you are enjoying some beverages as we go through the session. But I'm kind of glad I can see all these folks here because I do have a few questions for you at the front end. If you don't mind, if you could prepare with the little reactions, we can do something where you can raise your hand in response to a few questions. I just want to get an idea of who all's out there and what kind of capacity you're working in or where your interest may lie. So how many of you are involved in teaching in some way? If I could get some hands. Oh, there we go. Few. All right. I got some hands. We got some thumbs ups. All right, we got some teachers involved. Okay. So whether you're a teacher or not, how many of you are in, or, I see a few emeritus folks here. How many of you are in, or at least were in, the career that you expected to be in when you entered college? We all kind of start college and not of us end up where we thought. I see some people shaking their heads. Oh, not a lot of, actually only one person says yes. Warren, you are an interesting person. How many people start off thinking that they're going to be paleontologists? A whole lot of folks would say no, even among those who are paleontologists. I definitely did not end up where I had been sent to be. Curious, a lot of you said that you didn't end up where you were. How many of you were pre-med students at some point, considered yourself to be pre-med? Huh. I really expected there would be more of you who were at some time pre-med. And the reason why I have that expectation is because at Syracuse University for the past 16 years, I've been the only person responsible for the very large introductory biology courses. I get somewhere between 700, sometimes more than 700 students in the fall semester coming into my classes, and about 500 or so would consider themselves to be pre-med. Very few of them actually end up going on to becoming medical doctors. And that's not because they're not capable. It's not because they don't have what it would take to be a medical doctor. For many of them, they never really thought about it. They showed up at college having been told that they were supposed to be medical doctors or could be medical doctors and therefore should be medical doctors. Some of my students, a great many of them, have parents who are medical doctors and kind of had that expectation. But more often, I have students who are first generation college students, and they come from communities that don't have access to medical care. They don't have a whole lot of generational wealth. So they're being sent off to be medical students at some point, with the idea that they will pull their communities and their families upward with some social mobility. That's a lot of pressure. I have a lot of students with a whole lot of pressure to become medical doctors, and a lot of them feel that pressure all the time. And I think it's really a lot harder for the students who come in with that kind of expectations from their families and their communities when they're not really all that interested in medicine, apart from the pressure that they have from their families and their communities to do so. I'm going to start sharing my slides here. Wanted to be able to see your hands as they came up. We will get right to it. There we go. All right, so that is where we are and what we're doing tonight. All right, so as I was thinking about this and thinking about who might be here, I thought, I don't want to try to talk to people who know more about this stuff than I do about things that I'm going to mess up on. I want you to be able to get something out of it. And a lot of times it comes down to personal experience. I can talk to you about the things that have happened to me in ways. Oh, what happened there? Sorry.
And Jason, I'll just interject that we
Yeah.
have a very wide range of audience here,
Yeah.
from the emeritus, as you saw, but also quite a few undergraduates from a wide range of majors.
Oh,
So you
great.
are speaking to some of the very audience that you're speaking about.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. So as I started thinking about this, I started thinking about Darwin's experiences and how I have a lot of things in common with Darwin from my own experiences. And so do our students. So as I started this, I was thinking about how can I get some images that would communicate some of these things. So I asked ChatGPT, which is what a lot of my students end up doing uh, when they're looking for ideas. And I thought, what would have happened if I had met Darwin? So I asked ChatGPT to give me an image of Jason Wiles from Syracuse University shaking hands with Darwin, and it pulled this up. I don't know how old the reference image was for me. I thought that was pretty funny. So I said, you know what? Let's make Wiles a little heavier, a little older, maybe a little more white in his beard. And GPT said, no problem. Here you go. So it nailed it, right? I guess that's about the extent of where ChatGPT is, and we can always tell when our students are using AI in their assignments because it's not going to be quite right. So let's get an actual image. This is me at the Linnaean Society in London. I'm a fellow of the Linnaean Society, just as Darwin was. This is me with Darwin in the background and Wallace there. They, of course, presented their paper together introducing natural selection at the Linnaean Society. And that is how people tend to think of Darwin. That's the pictures that you see there on the left-hand side. Darwin in the background is this kind of grizzled old guy. You're not surprised to see Darwin looking like this. What I think is interesting is I took these particular photos from an article online that was titled, "Why Charles Darwin's Father Was Disappointed in Him." Wow, what a find. You don't really expect that when you're thinking of someone who is one of the scientists who really changed the world in the way that we think and whose work was so foundational to many of the advances in science since his time. Why would his father be disappointed in him? Well, it turns out that he didn't do what he was supposed to do. He was not really interested in a lot of the things that people thought he should have been interested in. So it was kind of an interesting thing to think about this kid. This is Darwin that you don't see. How could his father not be proud to the gills with someone like this, right? Little older still. I actually did look a lot like that guy when I was about the same age that you see there. And this is one of my favorite images that I've seen people try to make Darwin a little more human. This is one from a textbook from 1980 that tries to depict Darwin as he might have looked as a modern graduate student. When Darwin was about that age, he, as we all know, was going off on the Beagle and learning things that would stew in his mind for a very long time. But before that, he did go off to do what his father had wanted him to do. He went to Edinburgh, University of Edinburgh, to study medicine. This is me a couple summers ago, right outside Darwin's apartment on Lothian Street in Edinburgh when he was in med school. Now, the thing about that is he didn't become a medical doctor. It wasn't his thing. He didn't really enjoy all the things that he was learning there at Edinburgh. And it was a particularly hard time to be studying medicine prior to anesthesia and things like that. It just didn't agree with him. So he didn't make it, dropped out. That might be something that you would consider to be a failure and something that someone's father might be disappointed in them for. But it just wasn't his thing. And that's not a bad thing, to find out that something isn't your thing. But while he was there, he learned from a very important person in history, John Edmonstone, who was a specimen preservationist there at the University of Edinburgh. If any of you have ever studied biology in the context of natural history, you'll know the importance of preserving specimens for study and for teaching. And John Edmonstone was someone who excelled in this area and actually taught Darwin how to make taxidermy mounts and preserve specimens, things that would serve him well in his journeys on the Beagle, collecting specimens, preserving them, and sending them back for study. So John Edmonstone is a really important person because, well, he taught Darwin things that were of service to him, but probably also filled him with many stories of the place where he was born. You see, John Edmonstone was born into slavery. He was an enslaved person in South America prior to winning his freedom and ending up at the University of Edinburgh, where Charles Darwin learned a whole lot from him. And Darwin actually paid him extra to tutor him in these areas and probably gave him a lot of ideas about travel and things in the New World and things that he would have wanted to explore and study. So he actually had to convince his father that this was a very good idea for him to go on the Beagle. And, I'm no historian, and there are a lot of people here who probably know a lot more about this than I do. But there are a lot of ideas out there about how Darwin came to be on the Beagle, and the convincing that had to be done for his father to allow him to go, not as a naturalist, the common story goes, but as a member of the aristocracy who traveled as a companion or a dinner companion to the captain of the Beagle, Fitzroy. And so in this capacity, he had a lot of free time that the story goes that the actual naturalist was the ship's surgeon, Robert McCormick. There's a little bit of dispute to that now, and of course Darwin did indeed become the official naturalist on the Beagle. But this journey was all about doing something that his father could be convinced that was a good idea after having not done particularly well in medical school and getting a general degree largely in theology. But he was always interested in natural history, and this was something that he had wanted to do. And if he had indeed joined the clergy, it would have given him plenty of time to do a lot of collecting and natural history type work. But this was an amazing opportunity for Darwin to go and get some field work in a way that actually ended up with him becoming famous. So he just hadn't found his thing. What would have been his thing? I mean, it was certainly natural history. When I think about the pictures that you see of Darwin, he's not always happy. He's generally pictured as fairly grumpy. But I like this one. This one is from a children's book called The Voyage of the Beetle by Anne Weaver, relaying a story from Darwin collecting beetles. And the famous quote is, "One day on tearing off some old bark, I saw two rare beetles and seized one in each hand. Then I saw a third, a new kind, which I could not bear to lose, so that I popped the one which I held in my right hand into my mouth. Alas! It ejected some intensely acrid fluid, which burnt my tongue, so that I was forced to spit the beetle out, which was lost, as was the third one." But look at the expression on this person's face. He's out there collecting beetles and he just can't get enough of it. That was his thing. And I'm so delighted that he found his thing and was able to go on the voyage that led us to many great things. Now, sometimes it is the case that our students find their thing, and it is medicine. I deal with a lot of students who are in the process of finding their thing, and more often than not, it's not the medicine or not the field that they thought that they were going to go into. But when they find that thing, they get excited, just as Darwin always was about natural history and beetle collecting. Sometimes, however, it is medicine. For example, this is a picture of one of my grad students here. I think you can see one of my former grad students over here is Bruce Searles. This is one of my undergraduate students now, Juliana Verney, and this is one of Bruce's graduate students. So this is kind of an interesting picture for me. This is from last week, where I took some undergrads to visit my former graduate student, Bruce Searles, who is now department chair in cardiovascular perfusion at Upstate Medical University. He runs a simulation laboratory where he teaches people to become clinical perfusionists using high fidelity simulation to train folks. And this is one of his master's students here. So Juliana is one of those students that I've had in class for a couple of years now. She's taken several of my classes, and it's very easy to see when we're doing things that are not particularly interesting to Juliana. And I thought it was very striking when she got into this environment, how amazingly excited she was. She perked up immediately and began asking questions that were very insightful and showed that she was thinking very deeply about the physiology that Bruce and his team were showing us how they train people to deal with in the operating room. When Julia lit up and began engaging with things that I had taught her in the context of something that was her thing, it was remarkable, the difference that was there. I usually see it the other way around, where students who are pre-med or consider themselves to be pre-med are struggling with material, and I talk to them about it, and you can tell that they really just can't care about these things. And if we can get them to talk about things that they do care about, they become different people. So when I encounter students who are having difficulty with things that are hard because it's just not interesting, I like to find the thing that is of interest and watch them take off. And that's kind of what Darwin did. It's also kind of what I did. And I started off from a very different place than Darwin, but there were a lot of similarities in a lot of ways that you might not think of. So when I think about myself and my journey, it began here in this place right here, which you may, if you know some geography, recognize as the state of Arkansas. You can tell that that's me, the same hairstyle there, being delivered by the stork to Jonesboro, Arkansas, which is not where my family lived. I was born there because that's the closest place at the time to where we lived that had a hospital. And you can see the star jump to my hometown was about 60 miles. So if you can imagine my mom going into labor and saying, oh, wow, we need to get in the car and drive 60 miles to Jonesboro to the nearest hospital, that was quite a haul. Ash Flat, Arkansas, at the time had 667 people in the town. We didn't live in the town. We lived out in the woods. Ash Flat has a strange and interesting history. The cemetery in the town with the first person who was ever born there was a distant relative of mine. So it's actually called Wiles Cemetery. So we've got some deep roots in that town, but the town isn't now really what it used to be. It's grown a lot, well, let's just kind of get an idea of the area around there. This is the high school that I graduated from. It's Highland High School, and Highland High School was formed by the consolidation of two very small high schools, Hardy and Ash Flat. My dad was an Ash Flat guy. That's him there in the picture. My mom was a Hardy guy. So when the two schools consolidated, there was a whole mixture of folks meeting up and marrying, and there a lot of happy children came out of that. But you can see my dad there. He's pretty proud of me graduating there. This is the whole, it's not the whole school, but this is give you an idea of how big it is. This was the whole cafeteria here. And right back here, this point, that would be the gymnasium. And if you walk right in this door, in this corner right here, there's a picture of the very first graduating class of Highland High School, 1965, and my dad's picture is there. Two panes down the hallway is two graduating classes down from there would be where my mom was. But my dad has a history here too. But if you know anything about what was going on in Arkansas in the 60s, it was right after we had the Little Rock Central High School being desegregated and the governor calling in the National Guard to prevent it. There was a lot of racist backlash to that. And in the 60s, with the Civil Rights Act being passed nationally, when this school was formed, the local folks reacted in a way that was a signal of how they felt about those things. And they actually brought back those hateful flags that you see here.
That's good. That's good.
And this is the highway right in front of that high school. I took this from Google Maps a couple of years ago. And if you can see, that hateful flag was still on that marquee at that time. This is the house where my father lived when he graduated from the high school, across the street there. And there's a lot going on here in this picture that you might that you wouldn't know unless you knew a whole lot about that area. For example, this stretch of road right here, when I was in middle school, one day I noticed that there were a lot of Native American people walking up the street, and I do mean a lot. There were hundreds. They were recreating the Trail of Tears from the relocation of the tribes in the east to the reservation lands in the west. And so I did not know at that time that this was actually a piece of the Trail of Tears running through here. So there's a lot going on right in this picture for me, and something very important that I'll get to later on in my own progression. So yeah, it was very much a school that didn't have a whole lot of diversity because of the cultural signposting that was there and the things that had come before it. But that's where I came from. Now, another thing that you might know about Arkansas education is that it has a history of not teaching evolution. It does lie in the Bible Belt. A lot of folks where I'm from would proudly say that they're in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And if you know about teaching evolution in the South, then you're probably familiar with something like the Scopes monkey trial that happened in Tennessee, not Arkansas, but it's a neighboring state. But at issue was the fact that it was illegal to teach evolution in Tennessee. And with the same Butler Act that was in effect in Tennessee, it was also illegal to teach evolution in Arkansas. You probably know a little bit about the Scopes trial, and that it led to the conviction of John Scopes, who was teaching purportedly evolution in the Dayton, Tennessee schools, was convicted of teaching evolution, and that was the hope. The ACLU actually wanted Scopes to be convicted so that they could test the constitutionality of the Butler Act. But it was such a media circus that no one wanted to touch the aftermath. Scopes actually didn't get to appeal because the judge improperly imposed a fine, and so it was kind of dismissed before it could go up on appeal. And so it remained illegal to teach evolution, even though there was this great attempt to test the constitutionality of that law. But in 1960s, we finally got a chance to take this all the way to the Supreme Court, and that one did indeed come out of Arkansas. So at the same time that my parents were in high school in Arkansas, there was another media circus. It was a big deal in the news everywhere. And although we did get the right decision here, that it was impermissible to tailor the curriculum of a science class to the religious sensitivities of a particular sectarian belief. It didn't necessarily mean that evolution was going to be taught. So it was no longer illegal to teach evolution, but people knew that it was something that you didn't want to mess with. And that was the impression that my parents' generation, who then became my teachers in the same high school, had about teaching evolution. Was it wasn't something that they wanted to talk about. And it got worse, really, even though things were getting better. So the next thing that happened was they said, well, you know what? So it's not illegal to teach evolution anymore, but what we're going to do is every time you teach evolution, we're going to balance that with something called creation science or creationism. And right as I was going into the public schools in Arkansas in the 1980s, there was a federal court case where creation science was thrown out, but that was only binding in that district that included Arkansas. And later on, when I was going into high school, the fight that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, Edwards v. Aguilar, just over the border in Louisiana, really brought this back into the we don't want to mess with it kind of thing. So I didn't learn about evolution in my high school because people didn't want to talk about it. Now, I say I didn't learn about evolution in my high school. I did, but not during high school. During the weekends, they would often rent out the high school gymnasium or the cafeteria to bring in anti-evolution evangelists to teach us about the evils of evolution. So in my high school, I did learn about the tree of evil fruits that was rooted in unbelief and held up by a trunk of teaching of evolution. I saw a lot of images like this growing up. A lot of images from places like Answers in Genesis, where they painted secular humanism as the enemy of Christianity. And the problem that they said was that the creationists were attacking the end results instead of the foundation of evolution. These are the kinds of images that I saw growing up. They've now changed that to where the solution is to attack the root of evolution. And they're really good at doing this messaging. They really are. I've seen so many of these kinds of cartoons that are aimed at younger folks that really drive home the importance of standing firm against evolution. And this message is pretty powerful. Notice that as we go get closer in time, the anti-creationist or the evolutionist guy starts looking more and more like Bill Nye, and that's actually on purpose. But then we've got to drive it over the top and show the evolutionist as a green-haired weirdo who only thinks this because that's what his professors told them. So that's not what my folks wanted me to do. And much like Darwin, I was sent to where they thought I should go, which was Harding University, right there in Arkansas, not too far away. But I was sent with a very specific purpose of coming back home to be the town doctor. So just like Darwin, I was sent away to go to university as a pre-med student with the thought that I would come back and take over for our town doctor. We only had one, Doc Tucker, who is still practicing. I believe he's in his 90s now, and I never went back. But that was a hard thing for me to do, to talk to my parents about not going to med school. I felt like an absolute failure. Whether my grades said so or not, I didn't feel like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And yeah, I felt like they would be very disappointed in me, probably a lot like Darwin. And I didn't even have the courage to tell my family what I actually wanted to do by then. No one ever asked me what my thing was, what I wanted to do. They kind of told me what I was supposed to do. So I can imagine the pressure that Darwin was under as he developed his new ideas about the traveling and collecting new things and describing them for the scientific community, things that had never been seen before. I can imagine that that was very exciting, and having to convince somebody that was a good thing. Well, that's familiar to me too, because how was I going to tell my parents that I didn't want to go to med school? In fact, I never had wanted to go to med school. And the only thing that saved me was finding natural history and finding that I was actually very interested in things like foraging ecology. And at the time, what I really wanted to do was study sea otters. But how do you tell people that? Well, now we're back to this place right here. A lot of things happened here. And one of the things that happened in this house right here was the last time I saw my grandmother. I was in college. I was struggling with not doing as well as I thought that I should be doing, and certainly not wanting to do what everybody said that I should do. And as I don't know if it was a point of encouragement or a point of pressure, but as I was having the final conversation I would ever have with my grandmother, my dad asked her if she thought that I would ever become a medical doctor. And I was wrestling internally with not, just knowing that that's not what I wanted to do, and feeling the pressure of my family, and knowing that I probably wasn't doing as well as I needed to be doing if that was what I wanted to do, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so when my dad asked my grandmother if she thought that I would ever become a medical doctor, I didn't know what she would say. I was feeling a lot of things, and she said something that no one had ever said before about this question about me and my life. She said, if he wants to. That was powerful. And it took a few years to really catch on to that. But when I decided that I really wanted to study sea otters, that was something that allowed me to do that. My grandmother saying, finally, if he wants to. Well, at the time, it was time for me to do something. What I wanted to do was study sea otters. And there was this place that I had never heard of called Portland State University that said, yeah, sure, come on, you can study sea otters here. And so I very hesitantly started a conversation with them, and was delighted to find out that it wasn't my family that would have to pay for that, that they were happy to give teaching assistance to graduate students who were working on areas of science that were answering questions that people didn't know already. It's a very different model for medical school. So with that opportunity looking like a possibility, I moved out to Oregon, started working on sea otters. But one of the first things that they wanted me to do was take a course called evolution. See, they didn't teach that at Harding University. It was supported by the church congregation that, or the church denomination that my family was part of. And they didn't really talk about those kinds of things. So when I got to Portland State University and had to take these courses on evolution, and the mammalogy courses and marine mammals courses that I was taking were all rooted in evolution, it was as scary as it could possibly have been. I was terrified, because I'd always been told that all the evil things in society come from supporting evolution, believing in evolution, and teaching evolution. I was absolutely just scared to death. And I certainly couldn't talk to my family about it. But it turns out that evolution tied everything together. All the things that I had learned about biology in my undergraduate experience, the things that I had memorized, started making sense because they were tied together with a conceptual framework that allowed me not only to memorize things, but to think about what I should expect in situations that I had never encountered before. That's pretty powerful too. And by the time I was done there, I needed to know more. So I actually did a second master's degree in earth sciences, geosciences at Mississippi State University. And as I became to understand more about evolution, the history of life on Earth, and how this all made so much sense. At first, I was scared, then I was liberated, and then I turned a little bit angry and wanted to do something different to try to figure out how we can teach people about evolution and deep time in ways that weren't threatening, in ways that allowed them to make connections between big ideas in science. And I ended up talking to Brian Alters at McGill University in Canada. And it was a place I'd never heard of. It was a scary call to make, but we ended up talking for a long time. So I ended up there and got a PhD working on students in Arkansas as they changed their minds from creationism to acceptance of evolution. And that led me on a wonderful path. While I was at McGill, I was research manager of the Evolution Education Research Center, a partnership between Harvard and McGill at the time. And that ended up getting me a job at Syracuse University. So I kind of came around a long way. And as Don mentioned earlier, I ended up really getting into it and was named a friend of Darwin by the National Center for Science Education, to which the Arkansas Times said, "See, Arkansans can evolve." So I did finally find my thing. And that's something that we need to think about with our students when they're not doing as well as we think they should, when they're not doing as well as they think that they should, and when they're experiencing the anxiety and the pressure associated with trying to learn things that other people think that you're supposed to know and learn about. If we can help them to figure out connections to those things that they do care about, then it will make all the difference in the world in their motivation to do that learning. So I am thrilled when I see students find their thing, whether it's what they thought it would be, or whether it's something that is entirely different from where they started. And I do a lot of research around how students learn and how students are motivated. And one area that I do focus on is acceptance of evolution. That's what I was working on as a graduate student. So while I was a graduate student, this is where we were. This is a fairly famous paper by Miller, Scott, and Okamoto. And if you can't see that figure very well, I'll blow it up. At the time, this is where we were in relation to the rest of the world in terms of evolution acceptance. You see United States all the way down there on the bottom, with the only country that we had data on in this study below the United States being Turkey. Right after that, my colleague Salman Hamid published a paper looking at data from the Muslim world showing that, well, you think that's bad, Turkey is actually way ahead of the rest of the Muslim world at the time. So that's where we were. But how are we doing now? Well, I can say that we've made a lot of improvements. There was an article just this past month in Scientific America, a Scientific American by my friend and colleague Glenn Branch, where he really showed that teaching evolution has a bright future in the US. And he cites so many improvements in teaching evolution in the time since I was in graduate school even. The things that have been going on, courts have affirmed evolution education, have consistently determined that creationism, whether you call it creation science, scientific creationism, intelligent design creationism, all of that has been found to be unconstitutional and impermissible in public school science classrooms. Scholarly science and scientific science education organizations are very supportive of evolution education. They've developed many resources for teachers. So in the past 20 years or so, the resources for teachers for teaching evolution have just increased immensely. And their mandate to teach evolution has also kept pace with that. The state science standards and the NGSS have greatly improved in their representation and prescription for teaching about evolution and what students should know. Creationist attacks on teaching evolution are on the wane. Now they're not gone. We do have a case going on right now where there's a bill in, I believe it is North Dakota, that is trying to bring in intelligent design and other attacks on evolution into the state standards. We'll see where that goes. We do have a very different Supreme Court these days, so we'll keep an eye on that. But acceptance of evolution did become the majority position among the American public more than a decade ago. There have been a lot of polls that suggest that that is the case. Now, I personally have some issues with the ways that those polls are worded, but there's a lot of research going into that, and that's something that I've been a part of. Evolution education research has been thriving. There are journals that are fully focused on teaching and learning of evolution. The big scientific and science education organizations are supporting the teaching of evolution in tremendous ways, and no one has to go it alone. But there are some things that I'm working on now that you may be interested in that have to do with how we measure things like acceptance evolution. Recently, back in 2019, 2020 is 2019, one of my graduate students came into a lab meeting just absolutely angry over a paper that had been in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution that was arguing that student beliefs about evolution didn't matter. It was only their knowledge that mattered when it came to acceptance of evolution. But it was clear that they had used an instrument for measuring acceptance in a population that wasn't like a lot of other populations where it does matter what students believe about evolution from a religious perspective. So we were able to write this back to say, look, it's actually very, very complex. And this publication led us on this wonderful collaboration with a lot of people in a lot of places. We got NSF funding to look at how we measure evolution acceptance and try to get us toward a measurement of evolution acceptance that would be useful across different contexts and really give us a better picture of what evolution acceptance looks like in classrooms and the public. We were able to review all of the acceptance instruments that exist, and we found a few things. There's a lot of different kinds of measurements out there. They tell us different things. Two things that are important, though. One is there's no consistent definition for evolution acceptance that is at the heart of these existing measurements. And they really conflate knowledge and acceptance. So what we're trying to do now is to figure out a better way to measure this by saying, you know what, acceptance does have as a component this idea of knowledge. So we're trying to move toward an instrument that builds on a definition that we developed. If you want to see this latest paper, it's in the proceedings of the National Association of Biology Teachers Research Symposium. And our definition that we're working on now after coming through a long Delphi study is that in order to fully accept evolution, students have to accept that the theory of evolution is a well-established theory supported by scientific evidence, that life on Earth shares common ancestry, that life has been evolving for many millions of years, and that humans have a common ancestry with non-human organisms as well. And all of those things rely on knowledge of the evidence and the scientific consensus based on that evidence. But it also has to do with something that I call assent. So we're moving to something that gives not a kind of a confusing, conflated one number score to something that would take acceptance to mean that you assent to the idea of common ancestry, but you also have knowledge of the evidence in order to make that claim. And then we would have a better way to show where people might have higher knowledge but lower assent, and we would call those deniers, versus those who might not know a whole lot about it but not have a reason to reject it. So we have a very different picture of what acceptance means, and we're working toward how to measure that in students right now. that would give us the tools to teach students differently, because you will approach students differently who don't have a problem with evolution and who just don't know about it than you would those who know a lot of things about evolution but have well ingrained reasons for refuting the things that you might teach them if you didn't know where they were coming from. So we hope that we're going to be able to get funding to make this happen. We've got a lot of things going on with our funding agencies in this particular political climate. But we'll see what happens. And I'd like to have some conversation about your ideas on that and any other things that you might want to talk about. I'll stop sharing now and get to a conversation.
That was great. Thank you, Jason. And let's open it up for questions.
I'm also going to open up a beer if you don't mind. I'm going to go with Red Stripe.
Excellent. Excellent choice.
Cheers. I couldn't tell if that was a question from Warren or a clap.
That's a clap.
Okay.
So Jason, I'll start. Have you had occasion to go back to your undergraduate college to speak or speak in the area that you grew up?
I have definitely not been invited back to the college. There are a lot of things that are known about me that do not jive with where they are. Politically alone would probably make me very they'd be skeptical of me just because I don't have an R next to my name in anything that's public. I would love to go back there, though. I actually would be happy to talk to the students at Harding University. I've gone to a lot of other places. Portland State University had me in for a seminar where I did talk about my research in detail. It's kind of springboarding off of where I had been there. That was an interesting thing because my master's advisor is still there and remembered me quite well as the creationist student with very Ozarkian ideas, as she explained it, and was quite happy to see my own journey, but also the work that I've been doing with students and helping them to understand evolution. So that's very rewarding. I do get to go back to Arkansas and talk to different audiences there, not at the college that I came from, but say the Arkansas Humanist Association. Those kinds of folks have me in sometimes. I actually gave a commencement address at Ozarka College, where I did earn some credits while I was in high school. So they were interested to have me back there to talk about how you can go a lot of places from starting off in a small college in rural Arkansas. So yeah, I do get back there, and anytime I'm invited to go, I certainly will. And it's a different conversation, but one that I think is important.
Thank you.
Well, Jason, I will ask a question, which I've been dying to ask you for years.
Okay.
So I used to give a lecture at Cornell in one of their human evolution classes. I was asked for a number of years to give the first lecture of the whole semester, just to, I guess, warm people up. And my job was to talk about this topic of acceptance of evolution. And so for years, I would show the same slide. I would show the Gallup poll, the most recent Gallup poll. And I forget which exact year it was, but as you alluded, about 10 years ago, the lines started to cross in interesting ways.
Yep.
And so there was much made of the increasing secularization of the population, et cetera. Given the totality of the world right now, everything we know about everything, I guess I have a two-part question. One is, do you believe that? and do you think it's sustainable given the state of the world?
Yeah, that second part is harder to get to. I do have a problem with the Gallup polls because it's kind of two different parts, right? There's the evolution part and the religious part within the same questions. And they're also really tackling the hardest thing to get around in evolution. Those Gallup polls usually ask particularly about human evolution, which is kind of the last domino to fall as students like come to understand and accept evolution. That's the sticking point for a lot of people. So when that is part of it, you really don't get to think about all of the rest of the organisms. Are they on board with them having common ancestry and deep time and things like that? That's really lost in those Gallup polls because it focuses so heavily on human evolution exclusively. But then it also asks the questions in terms of 6-day creation versus evolution happened, but God directed it, versus evolution happened and God had no part of it. So functionally, when we're thinking about teaching evolution, where they think God came into that or didn't isn't functionally different, right? We don't have folks who are on board with evolution but have some type of religious belief countering the teaching of evolution or trying to bring in creationism because they've made that reconciliation. So those Gallup questions are really difficult to make mean what I really would get at if I was trying to figure out where students are and what do they not know and how does what they do know translate into their assent on evolution. So those questions are of some value, but I think it's limited, at least in my practice.
I agree completely about the Gallup poll. I think you're absolutely right. But I mean, the reason to use it is that they've been doing it for 40 years,
Yeah.
and you can draw a line, right? So,
Yeah.
so I guess I'm asking you an impossible question, which is,
It is.
what do you think about the state? What do you truly think about the state of current opinion, and where do you think it's headed?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so when I look at the studies of evolution acceptance, they're mostly done with scales that ask a bunch of questions and then give you a numerical value at the end. But that numerical value doesn't tell you the same thing for each person who's taking that evaluation. So it could mean that this person accepts a whole lot of evolution, but not these things, or they don't really know on any of those things, right? If they come out in the middle, they could be on both ends on some of them, or they might be in the middle and it might have, very different meaning. And then when it conflates knowledge with acceptance, then that becomes even more difficult. So when you have a student who doesn't know anything about evolution, but doesn't have a particular religious background that would cause them to have a problem with it, then you end up with people who don't have a problem with evolution, but they have a high acceptance score because they don't doubt it, even though they don't know anything about it. And so you were talking about the line about in those graphs that come out of the Gallup polling about secularization. Yeah, people have been going away from religion more and more recently. And so you end up with people who don't have as much of a reason to be anti-evolution, but it doesn't mean that they know anything about it. So I think your question has to do more with religiosity and the kind of religiosity that is there, because what we're seeing in a lot of things in this country is this polarization, right? Where there are fewer people in the center and you got more people on the poles and they're in their echo chambers more and more, and the algorithms are driving us with rage baiting. They're really pushing us apart, and there's less of a push to bring into the middle. So when we look at something like the religiosity things, we see people going more and more, the ones that are in the religious I guess, movements, the evangelical type of Christians, they are not necessarily moving toward more evolution acceptance. And when you see the religiosity dropping, it's often from those more mainline institutions that have very little in the way of opposition to evolution, but they're not seeing their numbers increase, and they are decreasing at a rate that is more rapid than the evangelical side of those kinds of things. So the secularization is, you know, good for upticks in evolution acceptance on those Gallup polls, but the level at which people are opposed to it on the evangelical side, I don't think is getting any better.
Thank you. You're just that you just verified that your title of that paper you wrote, that is true, that it's complicated.
It is really complicated.
And Rebecca's got a hand up.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi,
ESF
Jason.
colleague.
Yes, I really enjoyed hearing more about your trajectory. That was really cool, and the
Thanks.
pictures and everything. So thank you. I wanted to ask, kind of take things more from the polling data kind of stuff to the more personal one-on-one student kind of interactions.
Yeah.
So I teach evolution, as you know, at ESF to like 150 to 200 students, and there's always some students who will come up and say, yeah, I know I have to learn all this stuff, you know, I did it in
Yeah.
intro bio, and you know, nothing's really going to change my mind. I'll just learn it and fine. Like that's just what school is. I was just kind of wondering how you approach those students or that attitude, or if you address it at all, or.
Absolutely. So I will say that if students are coming to you to talk about it, then you're doing a good job of making them feel safe in doing so. I think a lot of creationist students would feel like it wouldn't be a good move to go and tell your professor that you don't believe anything that they're saying. So I think if they're coming to you to talk to you about that, that says something about you, and it says something about them, that they care enough that they want to talk to you about these things, because a lot of them just won't say anything at all. And I think that's one of the things that my colleagues at Syracuse have been so surprised by, is many of them just don't think we have any creationists at Syracuse University. But when we do the measurements, we find out that there's a lot more than they think. and that is something that they're, often very surprised about. I have students that come and talk to me about these things too, and it is a very difficult conversation for a lot of them. Sometimes it's not about the science. When they're coming to talk to you about this, they're in college, they're away from their families for the first time, and they're out of the echo chambers, and they're not getting the constant feedback of don't believe that, don't think about that kind of thing. So it's kind of an opportunity for them to grow in ways that they might not be otherwise able to, but it can be even more scary because you are outside of that area. And when you're
on my, it's AJ. I paid for your Saigon and I paid for your Saigon. Why don't you just stay fucking together?
Sorry about that. But when it comes to those kinds of conversations, you have to understand that they are dealing with things that aren't about you, that aren't about learning. It's about how they are going to perhaps change the way that they fit in the cultures and families that they came from. And that is often the scariest part. That was for me. It was something that I couldn't even tell my parents about. And, at the time I was in grad school, they didn't know what I was doing. They had no idea I was working on evolution acceptance. And that coming out moment was forced upon me by the Arkansas Times wanting to write about something that I was doing. And it was very, very scary, right? So, yeah, we do have a lot of students who are quietly dealing with a lot of emotions around these things. And I really appreciate your wanting to talk to them. In response to the question about, do I invite these kinds of things? I have some really good colleagues over at Arizona State University. Sarah Brownell's lab has done some really good work that was kind of pioneered by who was then a graduate student in that lab, Elizabeth Barnes, who is now a professor at Middle Tennessee State University. Where they have been working on something called cultural competence. And that goes across all areas of teaching. You have to know who your students are and where they're coming from, and recognize that they bring into your classroom things that you expect and things that you don't expect. So one of their papers, I think it was particularly striking in the title of it, was, can 6 minutes of cultural competence decrease feelings of it was anxiety and things like that around evolution. It was confrontational kind of stuff, right? So the idea that if you acknowledge that students may be struggling with those things and kind of diffuse the idea with the nature of science, that science doesn't really seek to get into the veracity, the existence of, the actions of deities and supernatural types of causation, that scientists aren't coming after your religion. And in fact, there are many scientists from various religions who are perfectly productive in their science, who've made their peace with evolution. Those things can be very, very powerful. So for me, I don't necessarily respond very openly to students who ask me about my religious orientation. I'm happy to tell them where I've been, right? Because that stuff's pretty public. But when they ask me about my religious orientation, what do I believe about scripture and things like that, it's a lot easier for me to say, well, if what you're doing depends upon your belief in a particular scripture, then whatever you're doing, it isn't science. So we can talk about what science is and does. And if you are in need of something from someone from your particular religious background that has to do with their reconciliation, I'm more than happy to take them. And for any religious denomination they want to bring me, I'm very good at bringing them someone from that same background who's done that work, whether it's going to the Clergy Letter Project and finding rabbis, priests, ministers, imams, Buddhist clergy, humanist clergy, whatever it is, who have signed on to these statements, and you can see where they are and what congregations they're associated with. Just knowing that someone from their religious background has made that work within that framework gives them the permission that they need, not to necessarily change their mind immediately, but at least to be able to approach it and learn about it in a way that is less threatening.
And I see Greg's hand up, but there's a question in the chat, which made me realize that the questioner, Sylvia Reeves, is speaking in 2 weeks, and somehow her slide got dropped from the coming attraction. So I'm going to quickly divert to that. So that you can.
What is it? Is it the question about what other supports should be in place to help students find their true passions? Well, one is, I think, just being open to hearing about them, right? Sometimes the students don't hear what you're saying, right? So when students come in and they're talking to me about whatever it is that they're learning, when I see them light up, or when I see them make a good, strong connection to something, or when they get something right that they've been struggling with for a while, and I see them light up on that, I'm happy to say, wow, you're really good at that. I think you could do this, professionally. When they're working on genetics problems and they're ready for more, they're like, oh, okay, I've got this down, and I can give them harder ones, and they start nailing. Man, have you ever thought about going into science? Maybe you should start getting into a research lab here with this professor or this professor. And sometimes they don't hear that correct. They hear me saying, oh, you don't think I can be a medical doctor, But what I'm really saying is, this is something that you're good at, and I can see that you're enjoying it. I'm telling you that you're doing good, right? And so it can be a hard thing, but I think a lot of times it does kind of increase that science identity to be recognized for achievement in doing a science thing. And sometimes it's those avenues that aren't necessarily so divorced from their medical identities that can lead them on a pathway that slowly diverges from that. Oh, you know what? You should get into this science lab over here because you're really good at this. And you know what? It would look really good on your med school application if you were involved in a research lab. And so many of those students get into the research labs and they end up going that direction. They've just never been introduced to that before. But some students, it's really just kind of like time out, right? I have had many students to come in and, they're studying something about, cells and tissues, and they're just hating it, and I can tell that they're just struggling. And I'll say, time out. Let's just think about something that you care about, that you actually like. You have all the money in the world. You get up one day, there's nothing that you have to do. Are you going to come into the lab and look at these cells under the microscope? No. Well, what would you do? What do you like? And then when they start talking about the things that they care about and they start to light up, then you can start saying, well, there's other people on this campus who study that. Why don't you take a class in that? Those kinds of things. Sometimes they just need the permission or the idea that they can explore something. That doesn't necessarily have to mean that they're not going to be a medical doctor or they're not going to do whatever it is that they thought that they were here to do. But the idea that our liberal education structure in United States universities does allow for that exploration of things that they never considered. So I think some of those supports that you're talking about should probably include, what can I do with these degrees that I'm earning? What can I explore that will help me fill out my my electives in ways that allow me to do something that I actually enjoy? So I think a lot of the supports can come from faculty, but also from advising, to recognize where students have interests. And, just the idea of having a course that you like in the mix of the things that you have to do makes a semester so much more bearable. But it also ends up getting you exposed to something that you might not have ever thought of as a career path, but something that you just enjoy. And those kinds of things, I think, can get students in different directions. You have to be careful when they do have those family pressures to do certain things, that they don't end up blaming you for something that they might be thanking you for later.
Yeah, so I will again note that great question came from the person who is speaking 2 weeks from tonight, Sylvia Reeves, with Drought Destroyer of Civilizations, which is my favorite title of the semester. So apologies for somehow leaving that slide out earlier. And now we will go to Gregory, and I'll stop sharing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gregory, is that your question in the chat?
Yeah. Have you read
Go
any
ahead and ask it so everyone can hear it.
Have you read any of Stephen Jay Gould's popular books? Bully for Brontosaurus, Wonderful Life, Flamingo Smile, Mismeasure Man, etc. The essays are easy to understand and, excellent for high school, college students. And when I was driving to work every morning, I had them on cassette from the library, unabridged. So it was just, so I would just listen to them as I drove to work and then drove back. So it was excellent. He gives a lot of history of Darwin too, everything about his
Absolutely.
life, So
Yeah,
have you read
Steve was
those
amazing.
books, and what are your opinions of that?
Oh man, they're great. They're wonderful. So Steve was a really amazing and interesting guy. We think about him as a paleontologist, but he had more scholarly articles about baseball statistics than I'll ever have.
Oh yeah, that's right. He did.
I mean, the widely read and trained and interested and quite a communicator. I use his work a lot with my students. I do teach the big introductory courses, but I also have a class that I teach called Evolutionary Biology, Religion, and Society. And I use a lot of Stephen Jay Gould in that. The students do enjoy it. They tend to think he can be verbose. I get a lot of comments about things like footnotes that go on for 3 pages. but you know, I'm never at a lack of entertainment in reading things from Steve Gould that you know are also very enlightening. So yes, I have read those. They are extremely valuable, not only for things like evolution, but for helping people to understand, you know, the nature of science, and things like non-overlapping magisteria has been very helpful to a lot of students who are making that struggle between science and religion, particularly Catholic students. Once they read about Steve and the Pope, immediately have the permission to not worry about it anymore. So yeah, it's been very, very helpful to use Steve's work. And as a matter of fact, his last book, the Structure of Evolutionary Theory, I have one signed by him that's fairly rare because it came out so close to his passing. So yeah, definitely.
He died so young too, 60.
And I'll just note that Rob and Warren were both students of his.
Yep.
Oh, great.
And Linda Ivany at my institution.
Yes. And Babette has her hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, I want to tell you thank you so much for
Thank
your presentation. I'm kind of new and come at this from a different aspect. I'm a volunteer researcher at Smithsonian, and I work, you know, with educators at Natural History.
Awesome.
I recently had gotten involved in a major initiative project that we were doing that was very parallel. I can't share specifics because this whole thing has crashed given what's happening today, and everybody's fearful for their jobs even. So I don't even know if I should be talking about it. But the big question right now is thinking, okay, if we can't go forward, get our funding, which was actually the next step in this project, as well as doing a tape with a group of teenagers that was going to be a part of it, given like discussions with specialists on this specific aspect that I don't know. It was supposed to be race, and I really the misconceptions of race, which is very parallel, it seems to me, to what you're talking about with evolution, especially since we were going to go at it with activities that surrounded the genetics as well as the natural history aspects of it. And so basically it's like, where do we go from here? Any suggestions you can have given your experience, whether maybe just somehow threading that fine line, because Smithsonian has always had to do the fine line of even mentioning the evolution versus the other views is, but maybe that would be a way forward if it could kind of be done, as you were saying, in some way of dealing with students and where they are, and any science that can put them in a situation that they can see different sciences. But love to hear your opinion on that, and also curious if there's anything else you can tell us about your students' reactions to what you're saying, and when you're encouraging them or saying they're doing well, putting them in the lab situation to see that they've found their thing.
Yeah, there's a lot there, Babette. Thank you for a lot of thoughts there. But you got to a point, you said you're not really sure that we should even be talking about it. But I think that's important that we do keep talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to shy away from hard conversations with students, whether talking to hundreds of them or individuals. It's a lot easier to make progress, I think, with individuals, but that doesn't mean that you can't with large groups as well. You just have to figure out who you're talking to and and understand that there is diversity in a group, right? So, yeah, I think we need to not run away from any of these things that might be challenges right now. If we're talking about the current situation with politics and funding, we don't know what it's going to end up at. It's not starting off in a way that makes us comfortable. But I think if we just kind of clam up and don't continue communicating and teaching and educating about science, then we're going to end up going more in the direction that we don't want to go. So I've never had a student who, if they're approached with respect and wanting to understand their perspective, I've never had any student that didn't want to have a conversation about hard things that was in a context that they felt like you understood and respected and wanted to know more about why they thought the way that they did. So I think that there is every reason to have optimism. And even though a lot of things are kind of scary and there are things that we don't know about the future, that doesn't mean that we give up. And we certainly can try to listen and understand and continue pushing for the things that are going to make a difference.
I think that everything you said is absolutely true, which is why I even decided to speak up. But then the problem in today's attitude, especially with public and private sponsored organizations, is basically one of, okay, we want to do this, we want it to move forward, but it's that how.
Yeah.
What is the step that would allow us to come up with the idea to write the grant and to figure out the funding, which even you said everybody's having trouble with?
Yeah, absolutely.
True.
I've had some very tough conversations recently with program officers and things like that about the kinds of grants that I've been working on. I've been working on a couple of proposals that just won't be funded. So we have to find out something else to do. And we can find, I think, wisdom in places that you might not necessarily think to look for them. I have a little girl who just turned 10. She's amazing. She is currently in a musical production of Frozen. And so we've been kind of going through those movies. And one of the things that happens in one of those movies is someone finds themselves in a very dark, hopeless situation, and it's overwhelming. And what do? And the answer is you do the next right thing. So we do have to think about, the challenges that are national and global in scale. But when it comes to each of us, I think locally, we can think about what is the next right thing that we can do to help. And sometimes it is just having that conversation, thinking about how we can, for ourselves, do the next right thing, for the people that we work with, do the next right thing. And just, it's hard sometimes, but those next steps can sometimes be small, but you got to keep taking them.
Yeah, that's basically where our thinking is the person who was in charge of this particular grant. That's where her thinking is, and that's why she's getting together with someone from Bryn Mawr, I think it is, who's a friend of hers, and they're going to sit down and actually try to do some brainstorming. So I thought, okay, if I can just give her, my thoughts, because I've been doing brainstorming, it'll just add to theirs to be able to create, what's coming forward. Would you be willing, if I could give her your email or something, if she wanted to say, contact you to talk about working with students with evolution?
Sure. Absolutely. If someone contacts me because you told them to, tell them to put in the subject line that Babette sent them.
Okay. I guess I need your email then. Where do you want?
Oh, I'm not hard to find. jwiles01 at syr.edu.
SYR?
As in Syracuse.
Okay.
.edu.
Well, thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you too.
In me a lot. So it'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I noticed that Robert has put in my email into the chat. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me, that's there.
Great. I'll just go to the chat and check it. Make sure I wrote it down correctly here.
I just put in a block of text with a bunch of text that ends with a link to Jason's homepage. And we are at about 8:30, maybe one more question to wrap us up for the night. And thanks so much, Jason. That was really great.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
I hope I hit the informal nature.
Yes,
of
yes. Maybe a question from one of the students would be nice.
Oh,
I don't know if we can shake it out of them, but I'll ask. Guess not.
It's all right.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. It was a great night, and join us 2 weeks from tonight for Sylvia's talk on Drought Destroyer of Civilizations.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
If anybody's at AAAS in Boston, I'm happy to hang out with you this weekend. That's where I am right now.